Okay, great. Yeah, so announcements real quick. I'll just re-mention it for the recording. Week 1 attendance quiz gonna be released by end of day today. Apologies for posting lecture 3 late. We're gonna post this lecture like right after. Homework 3 is going to be released by end of day today. Hopefully within the next like hour or two. So yeah, if there are any more logistical questions, you can leave them in the chat. And also for project 1, there's going to be an ed post about that, and they'll send an announcement out. So no worries about that. So let me share my screen. Can everyone see my screen by chance? If someone wants to give me like a yes. Thank you. Okay, let me open up the chat. Okay, great. Let me start the presentation. So before we get into the lecture, this is lecture 4, JavaScript 1, basic JavaScript. I'm going to be teaching it today. My name is Emir. I took this decal last fall. Sorry, is it possible to extend project 1's deadline since the previous lecture recording isn't uploaded yet? Yes, it most likely will be extended, but I can talk to the other staff about that. So lecture 4, JavaScript 1, basic JavaScript. I took this decal last fall. And then in the spring, I was on core staff as a part of WDB. I was teaching this decal. I was doing majority of the lectures for last semester. You can obviously find that content on our YouTube. And I was working also in the industry and some web development stuff with startups and whatnot, and working with that over the summer. And this semester, I'm running WDB's like mentor project initiative. We call it boot camp internally. So I'm leading that initiative, and I decided to come and teach some lectures. So I hope that you all find me interesting. And yeah, feel free to ask any questions in the chat, unmute your mic. Yeah, I don't mind anything. Thank you. This is you can see my little logo here. Okay, so let's come to this. I made this diagram last semester. And I find it really useful for people who are starting web development and their career in web development. So, you know, as we're all trying to get to, we want to build websites, right? And we want to build web apps and applications that are hosted, you know, on the web. So what does this mean? Well, there's a natural progression which we go through in the world of web development, which is HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then going to front-end and back-end technologies. So HTML, what is it really? So we talk about the house model. I'm sure they talked about it in previous lectures. So if you have a house, you can think of the walls of the house, the roof of the house, you know, the solid foundations of the house as HTML, right? HTML stands for hypertext markup language. You don't really need to know what that means, but a markup language is a language that's used to describe and construct the structure of text. So it's not a programming language. HTML is only used to describe how text is going to be structured, which is really important. So if you were to just use HTML, as you all have already, you would be able to build complete websites. You can launch, host, build a website all within HTML and publicly release it, and it's going to work. In the house model, we talk about CSS as well. So CSS you can think of as the paint on the house. If I want the door blue, the carpet, you know, red, and my walls pink, that's what CSS does to the structure of the house. And now you can think of JavaScript as the intelligence behind the house, right? So if I have a house, I need the lights to work. I need the plumbing. some functional things that happen inside the house that make the house interactive. So if you think about the history of the internet and web development, it all really started in this progression. So HTML came in 1993, CSS in 94, and JavaScript in 95. Web 1 was basically like static sites where people could just like view some information. Web 2 and all the technologies we love today, like Facebook, Twitter, Yahoo, Reddit, PayPal, these technologies all exploded as web apps in Web 2. The reason for that was because of this new wave of JavaScript and the interactivity that JavaScript brought to web development. So JavaScript is also important to be noted that it's the only programming language amongst the three of these. CSS and HTML, you cannot make any kind of calculations. You cannot build functions that are going to reuse properties in HTML and CSS. You kind of have to, hard code everything into your web app, which makes things kind of annoying. And we can use the power of JavaScript to add interactivity and create some fun abstractions and functions that we can use throughout our web application and make it really dynamic, which is super cool. So if you think of any application, any web application that's out there right now in the world, you'll find these three components. And you'll find basically the majority of web apps today are built basically exclusively in JavaScript. Front-end and back-end technologies we'll get to later in the semester, but JavaScript is basically the foundation of all web apps. 99% of all web apps are built in JavaScript or in TypeScript, which is basically a superset of JavaScript. But we'll get to all that later. No worries. But JavaScript is pretty exciting. If you've gone through any programming at all, even apps like Notion, for example. So that's an interesting question. Notion is actually it's an application that I believe is built somewhat in React and JavaScript, but Notion utilizes a lot of markup languages. So if you're ever using some software that's specifically only for, editing text, then, if you work with some software that's specifically for editing text, that's going to be a markup language. It's typically not, something else. But considering that Notion has to have a bunch of interactive components to it, for instance, like logging in, sharing, all of anything smart you can find in an application is going to be through JavaScript. If you have anything to do with interactivity, that's not just simply viewing and editing, for instance, this here, right? Everything here I can see, I can, look at this, see what's going on. But if I exit out of this and I want to share this with someone, for instance, all of the smarts behind the web application comes in JavaScript. So React, we're going to get to later. But it's actually just a JavaScript library for building websites easier. What's the difference between JavaScript and React and Flutter and stuff? So JavaScript is the foundational programming language behind every single web application. React and any other framework like Next.js, Vue, Gatsby, these are actually all just libraries. So they're built on top of React. So you can think of them as basically just let's say in React, I want to build a component. Let's say in React, I want to build a button, right? And so in HTML and CSS, we learned how to build a button to style it, to make it nice, whatever. And let's say in JavaScript, I want to, make that button send me to a different, or let's just say I want it to tell me if something's sold out or not. Right. So let's say I have a buy button on some e-commerce website. And if I want to click on it, it's going to send me to some buy link. But if I click on it and it's out of stock, it's going to pop up an alert on my page that says out of stock or something. So that's JavaScript. You can think of anything intelligent in a web application as being built in JavaScript. And then React and all these other libraries out there are just pre-built components that are just HTML, JavaScript, and React so that you don't have to hard code everything from scratch. You don't have to build your own button every single time you use it. You can just import one from React and it makes everything a lot easier. So this is an important thing to know because people believe web development is all kind of like React and whatnot, but you can be a professional web developer with just HTML, CSS, and React. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Libraries like React, Next, Vue, Gatsby, everything you've heard about are just making your life easier, but it's not actually required. Of course, when you get into web development, you're going to be using these technologies because it's going to speed up, and make life a million times easier for you. But you could make every single application out there in the world, from Facebook to Twitter to, anything, any application you've ever seen on the internet, they all use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The libraries are just to make your life easier. So a framework is that usually a tool set built on top of a basic language. So a framework colloquially is a little bit different than library. So library, basically a framework means that you have to follow some rules and guidelines of the framework in order to use it. Framework and library these days are basically interchangeable. So you can say React is a framework and React is a library. People that are a little bit older will be like, will like shun you for saying like framework instead of library, because technically it's a library. It's just a bunch of pre-built things that you can use to make your life easier. And typically a framework is like something you have to follow along. So that's a difference, but these days it's interchangeable. You can say framework, library, and everyone's going to understand what you're saying. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about, I just talked a lot about the foundations of web development and kind of the big picture ideas here. Okay, if not, I can move on, but literally any questions, just post them in the chat. I will answer them. Okay, great. So let's get into the lecture. So what is code? I love this slide for many reasons. So code is for humans first and computers second. It's basically just notes on how to solve a particular problem. So why is this important? I could write code on a napkin. Everyone here can write code on a napkin. Why don't we write code on a napkin? Well, you might be like, okay, well, how is the computer going to understand what we're saying? And that's basically the issue. But we could write code on anything, and we develop programming languages for us to understand what we're writing. If we were just computers, we would just be writing 01010001 and in, some byte format that computers can understand. And then we would send it to the computer and the computer would do some processes, but we're not computers, we're humans, which is why everything is in English for the most part. So, its code is built for humans first and computers second. You could write code, on a napkin. It's just that the computer is not going to be able to interpret it, right? But on your computer, we have things called text editors, right? So these are not anything complex. You can write code in your Notes app, and then you can copy that over into a browser and it would run. You should actually try that. I'm not even kidding. Text editors are just around for us to make it easier to write code. But they're nothing more than editing text, and code is just text that we built for us to understand. And they have some functions that we can use so that the computer can understand what we're saying. And then we can do some, hill finger writing code in Notepad. Exactly. I mean, you can write it on literally anything. The browser is just an interpreter. Participant press a live transcription. Okay, I can do a transcription, I guess. I don't know if they typically allow this, but I don't really care. Oh, wow, that is annoying. Wait. How do I get rid of this? Okay, I'll just move it away so I can't see it. Okay, whatever. Text editor and IDE. So an IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. So that's typically, these days also it's the same thing. Historically, an IDE was used for like one particular like software. So if you used back in the day like Eclipse or any of those old IDEs, they were basically the only way that you could run programming languages. So an integrated development environment basically allows you to edit text and also run the text in the text editor. In Notepad, you cannot run the text in the text editor. But that's why web development is so easy, because actually what runs our program is the browser. So you can think of the browser is like basically the text editor, and the browser is an IDE. So an IDE is just able for us to write code and then run it. The text editor doesn't allow us to run the code, but the browser acts as an interpreter for us. So let's go to the next slide. So when we write code in a text editor, so here is an example of some basic JavaScript code right here. Don't worry about the semantics of like what's going on right now. Obviously, if you're familiar with the programming language, you'll be able to read this in 2 seconds. But I'll just explain this in plain English so that even if you've never seen code in your life, you'll be able to understand what this is happening. But basically what you're saying here is that you have some variable, and we just use the term variable as some memory that's going to be allocated some value. So if you think of my name, let's say I'm just some node, and my node was assigned the name Emir. And we have some node right here, which is some variable, and it's assigned 500. And this is the type, or really the type of the node that we're assigning. So, when I was born, they assigned me the type human. They called me, or let's just say they said human. Then my variable was like, I don't know, person, human person, and they gave me the value Emir or something. But here we're defining monthly rent as some variable. We're giving it the type constant, and we're assigning it the value 500. Same here, we're saying yearly rent is some constant variable. We're calling it yearly rent, and we're setting it to the value of monthly rent multiplied by 12. So if I console.log, it's the same thing as like print line or print or anything you've seen in any other programming language. Or if you haven't seen any, basically this is just going to tell you, it's going to tell your computer to basically print out in your terminal, execute, find the value of what's in this yearly rent, and then print it out in the terminal. So I'm going to say console.log yearly rent, and it's going to print the value 6,000 because 500 multiplied by 12 is 6,000. So this slide is trying to tell us, why isn't this 0101 equals 000111000? Well, that's because we wouldn't be able to read it. So if we say monthly rent and then yearly rent, and this is trying to calculate what's our yearly rent given our monthly rent, and we know that there's 12 months of the year, it's helpful for us to understand. And especially when you're working in a team project, when you're in the industry, or like later on, you're in a startup, you want to build your own website, or even if you want to build a website for yourself, it would be incredibly hard to understand your code if you said const A equals 500, const B equals whatever, right? 99% of people that are on this call are going to understand this. I'm just reiterating that simple fact. Make it so that everyone can read what you're saying. Even if I have no idea what's going on, I can look at someone's code and understand what's happening. It's very important. Okay, so let's get into JavaScript. So as any programming language, we have statements. So we use statements to declare and initialize variables. With JavaScript, only one thing is ever happening at a time. This is important. So this is called single threaded. It's not a term you need to know, but you can think about it as if you're going from this past example, you start from the top and you go downwards. You're only executing one line at a time. Many programming languages are multi-threaded. You can read more about that if you want. It's going to be more important in later lectures, but you don't really need to understand that right now. All you need to think about is that JavaScript goes line by line. It executes only one thing at a time, and that's it. So we have some variables here. You denote a variable that you're defining by var. So if you have just some generic variable, you're going to say var and the name of the variable, and then you're going to assign it a value. So here we have var x equals 5, var y equals 6. Then we're going to say variable. We're giving it the name z. We're saying x plus y. So we're going into x, we're finding the value of x. Then we're going into y, we're finding the value of y. We're adding those together, and then z is going to be given the value 11. Syntax and convention. So we comment our code with double forward slash. We end statements with semicolon. This actually isn't required in JavaScript, and the later on you get, people will intentionally keep them or intentionally remove them. It's really just a preference. For now, just end all your statements with semicolons so you know where they end, because sometimes your code can get confusing. So I would just say when you're starting out, just put a semicolon. It's not going to kill you. But if you omit it, it's not going to error either. So for instance, okay, so JavaScript, we use camel case as convention. So as you saw in these variable definitions here, you said monthly rent. So this is lower camel case. So it starts out lowercase and then uppercase. It's just naming convention. Again, it's not going to error. It's just what we like to do. So in Python, we separate our words with like this. So we say this is a Python variable. You can notice the underscores. In JavaScript, we just have this capital, capital, capital. We can also, this is also one thing. We will default to the var type if we omit the name of the. So if we just give our variable a name and then we assign it a value, it'll default to var. But obviously we can put var and then we can say JavaScript var. And this is going to be the same thing as this in terms of how we're going to define variables. So yep, types. Types are actually fairly simple in JavaScript. Also, feel free to put any questions in the chat if you have any. I assume no one's really going to have that many questions, but if you're ever curious about something, just type something in the chat. Okay, so numbers. JavaScript doesn't differentiate between integer, float, etc. So this is really nice. It just has numbers. So, 1, 1.1, 1.5. Won't it cause error if we don't declare variable for variable? So actually, if we don't declare variable, it will not cause an error. It will give it the implicit variable type. You can try it out. I'm pretty sure it doesn't, but obviously everything can be tested. Does JavaScript have a distinction between primitive and reference types? So between primitive and reference types, you're talking about basically types that are just given a value like this, and then types that hold values like an object or something. We don't necessarily call it that and make that distinction because JavaScript is pretty simple. But yes, there are primitive types and reference types, and I'll talk about those types. But everything I'm going to talk about right now is primitive. So primitive just meaning we just assign it a value and it's just given a value. We don't assign like it as a reference to another value, which we'll get into later, which are like objects and whatnot. But for now, let's just talk about these types. So simple types, obviously we have numbers. So we have 1, 2, 3. We just call this a number in JavaScript. So we say variable number 1 equals 1, var number 2 equals 2, var number 3 equals 3, var number 4, we just add all these together. If I said 1.1 or 0.1 or 5.2, whatever it is, it'll always just be a number, even though in other languages it's called float or decimal or whatever it is. In JavaScript, we keep it simple. We say number. Cool. Strings. So strings, you can think of them as a string of one-letter characters. We use double quotes or single quotes. We can connect strings through concatenation. We can do some JavaScript candy, syntax candy, as I like to call it, to basically insert some value into a string, all of which I'll show right here. So we can say first name Emir, last name Karaveg, my last name. I can concatenate strings by saying variable sentence equals hello plus first name plus empty quotations plus last name. How are you? So this is just adding together strings. It's really easy and simple. JavaScript is super, super, super oversimplistic and easy to pick up. And that's really nice for everyone that's using it. So we also have some interesting thing here that you're going to only find in JavaScript. You're never going to find this anywhere else. Some languages might add this, but only JavaScript has it, where you can see. So here I'm going to have a variable sentence with template. And we use this backtick. You'll find this if you have, I forget what's like the traditional type of keyboard that most people in the US have, but it's the backtick on the top left corner of your keyboard. So if you backtick, I can say hello. I can add this $sign here, add two basically curly braces. Inside the curly braces, I'm going to put a variable name. Xquery does this too. To be honest, I'm not too sure, but you can test it out, whatever. Not familiar with the language or whatever that is. Okay, so if you have curly braces, you put a variable here and a variable there. It'll just say, Arabic, how are you? Pretty simple stuff. So console.log sentence with template. I'm going to print it out to my terminal. And if I run my code here, I'm going to see, hello, Emir Arabic, how are you? Hello, Emir Arabic, how are you? So they print the exact same thing. This is trying to tell you there's an easy way to make sentences that's not adding all these pluses. This might be pretty hard to read. This obviously is maybe a little bit easier to read if you can get over the fact that it's like some weird notation here. It's really all for your preference. You can do everything a million ways within JavaScript. They're all equivalent. Whatever you want to use, just be consistent with it so that other people can read your code easier. Booleans, we're going to fly through all these parts. Then we'll get into the more interesting stuff and actually do like a code example. So I'm just going over all the types. But this is the final type we're going to talk about in terms of primitive variables. So we have, you can think of variables as a light switch. They're either true or false, 0 or 1, whatever you want to call them. So you can say variable true value is equal to true. We denote it by lowercase t in JavaScript, as opposed to capitals in other languages. Variable false value, we give it the value false. We can use the not. And if we give a true false equals to the not of true value. So if I look in true value, I find that it's true. Not true is going to be false. So we're going to assign true false to false. And if I print it out here, it's going to come up as false in my terminal. Okay, great. Any questions on any of the types? Anything that anyone is curious about, has questions of anything at all? Okay. The template was just a string, right? You're talking about this right here. Yeah, it's just a string. So I printed out both of them, and it just came out to string. If you checked its type, it would just be a string. It's just a cool way to like insert variables into a string without having like plus and then having to do all these like crazy quotations and stuff. It's also should be noted here, you can use double quotes. You don't have to use single quotes. Just be sure if you're using single quotes, you don't do like yours with an apostrophe, because then it'll end the quote. Then you'll actually error. But yeah, that's that. Okay, cool. Operators. So some basic operators here. We have friends at a party. So for initializing friends at a party, it's a variable. we're giving it the name friends at party with lower camel case. We're assigning it to a number. Then we're saying friends at party equals friends at party plus one. So we have now one friend at the party. Plus equals one is another way of doing this. We can also do friends at party plus plus. We can also do plus plus friends at party. So these are all equivalent ways. Just don't use this last one. It's just, I don't know. It's so confusing. Like, why would you put that? If I saw that in someone's code, I'd be pretty confused. This is fine. Plus equals one is maybe even the best, but plus plus is okay too. Whatever you want to use, just keep it conventional. This last one, I don't even know why it's allowed. It should be illegal, but it's gonna run completely fine. So if I console.log friends of the party, 4 is gonna come up. Guess I'm using that last one. I don't know. I might have to mark you on your homework if I see that. No, I'm just kidding. So we have operators as well. Does plus plus always add 1? Yes, it does. If I did plus equals 2, it's not the same as plus plus. Plus plus only adds 1 because the most common increment is by 1. So I guess they wanted to have plus plus as 1. If you do plus plus plus, I think it'll just error. I don't think it'll add 2, but that'd be an interesting experiment. Someone should tell me if that works. Okay, cool. Let's go to comparisons and logical operators. So you guys can read this real quick. And I'm going to go into the example in the next slide. So the only thing to note here that's different than any other programming language is that in JavaScript, we can set two values equivalent, even if they're not the same type. We can compare them on their equivalency, even if they're not the same type. This is important because if I want to have the same type, I have to make sure that I have a triple equals. Less than shouldn't be, yeah, you're right about that. This should be less than. Thank you for the catch. Yeah, so here it is on the next slide. So I have a variable x equals to 5. So this is a number. It is 5. So if I set x equals to 10, this is obviously false. 5 is not equal to 10. Is 5 equal to 5? Yes. But is 5 equal to the string 5? This actually comes up true. So this is an interesting thing about JavaScript. You can actually compare equivalency of values that are not the same type, specifically between strings and numbers. You couldn't do this between a Boolean, obviously. So you could say, you know, quotations 10, and then you could say, does quotations 10 equals just the number 5? You can compare the string 10 to the number 5, and it would be true. So is 1 equals true? So you're saying is 1 equals true? Does it come up to be true? I think any number is going to be true, but actually, I don't know if 0 is false. We can test that out. That's a good question, though. But I don't think in JavaScript 0 is false. For other languages, it is, but we can test it out. We'll test it out actually in the code demo that we do at the end. But that's a good question. But in any case, so if I say x equals, I have a triple equals here. If we do it to 5, it's going to be true. But if we do it to 5, it's going to be false. Because now we're not only checking, we actually first check the type, and we see that the type is not equivalent. So we're just going to automatically return false. Here, we first check the type. We see that the type is equivalent. Then we check the value, and we see that the value is equivalent. So we return true. Here, it fails on the first check, which is the type. Here is the same thing. So if we say x not equals to 5, it returns false because we're saying is 5 not equal to 5? And that's obviously false because 5 is equal to 5 because we're not doing the double equal sign. We're just doing a singular. So it's saying is 5 equal to the, doesn't matter about the type, but the value that's in this string. And that's true. So actually returns false. But if we say x not equal 5, this is going to return false. But if we say x not equals 5, this is true. So 5 as a number is not equivalent to the string 5. Here it is though, because we're not evaluating type, we're just evaluating the value inside of the string. Okay, I hope that made sense. Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to continue, but if you have any questions, put it in the chat. Control flow, just some syntax related to if-else statements. So if we want to regulate the flow of our program and control some logic, we can use if and else statements. So if you have if some statement, it's going to execute this line. Else if statement. Does JavaScript require an else statement, or can I do else if? It does not require an else statement. Yeah, it doesn't require an else statement. You can just do an if statement. You can do an else if statement. If and else if, you do not need an else statement at the end. These are all optional. You could just do like, yeah, you could just do an if statement. Obviously that has to be there. And then an else statement or an else if. You do not have to do else. I'm almost 99% sure about that. Okay, great. So you can see here const sky is blue is equal to true. So we're setting this variable sky is blue to true. Const is a constant, as opposed to variable, which is just a normal variable. It can be changed. It's important to know that constants cannot be changed. And if I manipulate this value, it's actually going to throw an error. So we can test that in the demo, but constants, you cannot change their value. Variables, you can. So constant sky is blue is equal to true. So I'm going to say if sky is blue. So this is going to say if sky is blue, it's going to point back to this variable. It's going to say true. So I'm going to put true in here. So this is going to execute, and it's going to say console.log the sky is blue. If I run this code, it's going to say the sky is blue. Another one is if 2 + 2 = 4. I'm going to console.log. Oh, thank God, the fundamental principles of mathematics still hold true. Else panic. And we find that indeed the fundamental principles of mathematics still hold true because 4 is equivalent to 4. If this was a string, we would go to the else case because this would not be true. But if we had 2 equal signs and then a string, it would also execute because of the logic operators that we talked about previously. While loops, you can just literally think of them as I want to loop through something until some terminal condition. So remember before how we had to add that operator every single time I wanted to add a friend to the party? Well, we can make that a lot easier on ourselves if we just do a while loop here instead of friends at the party plus 10 times. So we're having the same variable, friends at a party. And while my friends at a party is less than or equal to 10, friends at a party is equals to friends at a party plus 1. So we're going to increment friends at a party by 1. We're going to go back through this loop where it's going to say, okay, while friends at a party is less than 10. So friends at a party is currently 0. So while 0 is less than 10, that's true. Friends at a party equals friends at a party plus 1. So now friends at a party is 1. So I'm going to go back to the while loop and it's going to say 1 less than 10, true. Now increment. 2 less than 10, true. 3 less than 10, blah, blah, blah. Until it's 10, it's 9, and it's going to say 9 less than 10, true, increment. 10 less than 10, false. It's going to jump out. We're going to console.log this. It's going to execute 10. Great. For loops, we have a definite amount of times we want to run something before. So instead of running until, we're just going to run a certain amount of times. So this is the same syntax as Java, for those of you that have worked with it. If you haven't, I'll explain it in a second. So let is the equivalent of var. Actually, it's really much better to use let than var. There were some, var was the original variable for JavaScript. They later introduced let and const. Nowadays, everyone only uses let and const. Const is actually much more commonly used for something because, you want to make sure that something is going to hold if it's, not being manipulated. For a variable that's being changed, just use let. There's only 3 types of variable definitions. You can use let, var, and const. Just stick with let and const. So we're going to say let friends at a party equals 0. The same idea here, but now in the for loop, we're going to initialize a new variable, and we're going to say for let I equals 0. So we're going to initialize I to be 0. We're going to loop through until I is less than 10, and we're going to increment by 1 every single loop. So we're going to say friends at a party plus plus through the loop. So it's going to say for I is equal to 0, 0 is less than 10. Let's increment after this loop. So we're going to say I is now 1. We're going to say friends at a party is now 1. And we're going to come back here. And so it's going to say 1 is less than 10. Now I is 2. Then we're going to say friends at a party is 2. And we're going to keep doing this over and over and over again. And then it's going to say 10 is less than 10. That's false. Exit out of this. We're going to console.log and we find 10. Very simple. Functions. Functions are really important because they reuse useful pieces of code. So for instance, if I wanted to add 10 friends at a party, I can make a function that's going to add 10 friends at a party every single time. So I don't have to hard code this every single time I want to add 10 friends to a party. So if I go here, I have the function add to and the parameter. It's important to note here that a function is defined by saying function. The name of a function in lower camel case, the parameter, you do not have to give the parameter a specific type. Any type can be passed in here. And we're going to return whatever's passed in here plus 2. So we're going to say, we're going to initialize a new variable, final answer equals add 2 to 5. So we're going to jump to this function. We're going to pass in 5 as the number, and it's going to return us 5 plus 2, which is 7. So if we console.log our final answer, 7 is going to be placed into here. We're going to look at the value of final answer, which is 7, and we're going to display it right here. If you do number plus equals 2, does it change number? Is it an object in Java? Or if you do number plus equals 2, you mean here? Oh, without returning. That's a good question. So if you do number plus equals 2, it's not going to return. It's not going to give a value. That's a great question. So it doesn't. Yeah, no, it's not going to change. Pass by value. Yeah, exactly. You can test that out, but I'm almost 90% sure you don't pass a reference or whatever it is in other languages. I forget. I haven't taken 61B in a long time. But yeah, I think it just passes the value in there. You can test it out, but it will not change the value. So if I had a number on the outside and then I would pass it in as a parameter and I would say a number plus equals 2, yeah, it'll probably throw an error. It will not return a value back to whatever it is. So if I console.log final answer, it's going to return 7. Okay, so what's going on here? Oh, yes. So we have a function here, and it's going to be a greet function. We're going to pass in a greeting, the first name and a last name. We're going to return, and we're going to use that third method of like that backtick, which is, I have the $, a greeting, and I can say, I'm extremely pleased that you could join us, first name, last name. If I console.log greet of Ahoy and Emir Karabeg, it's going to then display in the bottom, Ahoy, I'm extremely pleased you could join us, Emir Karabeg. So this is like just an example of using this notation for JavaScript, this function declaration, and also right here, you can like stack different functions on top of each other. Okay, so that was a lot of stuff that we just did. Let's throw them all together in a quick demo that I'm going to show you all. So I highly suggest everyone to follow along with what I'm doing. All you need is just some text editor with all you need is a text editor, actually. It might be useful to actually literally all you need is a text editor. So I'm gonna give everyone like 2 minutes 2-3 minutes to open up a text editor. Also, real quick, hopefully they gave you this in another lecture. If they didn't, I would do it right now though. Look up node install. I'm going to copy this link in the chat actually. I want everyone to install Node if you haven't already. You can check if you have Node. If you open up your terminal, you can say node-v, and if it returns some value, you have Node. If you don't have it, then I would suggest just taking a quick minute to just install it to your computer. Using one of these like installers, it's super, super, super useful. And I'll explain what it is while everyone's doing that real quick. But Node is a JavaScript. It's a basically a JavaScript runtime engine. So what that means is it allows you to run JavaScript outside of the browser. That's really useful because when we have these coding examples, or if you want to code JavaScript on your own, there's no default compiler or interpreter for JavaScript. So using Node is really useful for running Node by yourself without having to run it in a browser. Also, while people are installing this, I'm going to give a little detour on basically what is happening when we program a website. So JavaScript is interpreted. Yes, it is. Every language is interpreted. Or I guess some languages, there's like some niche vocabulary that they use, but the methodology of interpretation can be applied to every single language. So say I have some file here. I'm going to call it index.html. You guys don't have to write this I'm just waiting for everyone to just download Node. But while they do that, wait, don't say. Also, if anyone has any questions on anything we just talked about earlier today, feel free to ask me. Yeah. Const and let. So const x equals 5. X. So the question in the chat is, what's the difference between const and let? So right here, if I say y plus equals 1, console.log y. So we use Node because node test.js. Okay, so the reason we use Node, let me make this bigger to make sure everyone can see this. Okay, so we use Node to actually run. So make sure you're in the file of whatever, wherever you save your folder. So if I'm in like my root folder here, I put this in downloads. So if I go to downloads, it's in here. So I run node test.js, and it then actually runs this file. Can we declare a variable without specifying its type? For example, y equals 5. So I believe that's true. We're going to test all these things right now. Okay, so the first question is, what's the difference in const and let? So we said here, let y equals 5, and we're adding 1 to it. And if we print it out, it says 6, which is great. But now let's do x plus equals 1. Let's save this, and let's print x out. If we run it again, an error is thrown here. Why? We can see why. Well, x plus equals 1 is erroring. That's because you cannot manipulate a constant. A constant always has to be the same. We can only read a constant. We cannot update a constant. So yeah, we can let me actually see something. Okay, is it possible to overwrite? No, you cannot even overwrite a constant. So yeah, if you keep a constant, it's important because if you like, let's say, I'm doing some calculations and I'm saying, let's go back to actually yearly rent. Let's go back to the value of, let's go back to that example of like monthly rent and yearly rent. So if I say let monthly rent equals 500, right? So intuitively, sorry, intuitively, this calculation is not going to change, right? Because there's always 12 months in a year. So yearly rent is going to be whatever monthly rent is multiplied by 12, right? But I wouldn't want monthly rent as a constant. The reason for that is because monthly rent might update, right? Like what if we got monthly rent from like a function that was always returning a different value? I wouldn't want to keep this constant, so I'm going to put this in a let variable. So we can actually change the value of this, right? Because maybe later down the line, I'm saying, so let's actually make a function, calculate yearly rent. We pass in monthly rent. Wait, does this mean that yearly rent won't change when monthly rent does? So actually, yeah, so that's a good question. Yearly rent can never change once it's initialized. But I would never like in a real, so this is the thing. Sorry. So yearly rent, what's actually happening here behind the scenes? I'm declaring some variable and I'm giving it the value 500. So if I were to look at my computer, this is what would happen. Also, remember / for comments. So in my computer, if I were to look inside, this is what it would show me. Oops, okay. It would say, monthly rent. Right? So what's happening here is like I'm allocating some variable, some space in my computer. I'm assigning it the value 500, right? So now let's go to the next line. So now I'm saying I'm making a new variable, right? And in this new variable, I'm saying monthly rent. Oops, monthly rent times 12, right? So what's actually happening is when I see this variable, I'm going to refer back to this variable. I'm going to look inside of this variable. It's going to say 500. I look in this variable, and then I'm going to put in a 500. I'm not going to put a reference to this variable. I'm only just going to put in the value of the variable, right? So once I do this calculation, it's going to give me 6,000. So the answer to your question is, even if you had constant or let, doesn't matter what you put. If I were to say monthly rent is now equal to 1,000, or let's just say 1,000. Yeah, we would expect yearly rent, like our logic would tell us yearly rent is going to be, 12,000 now. But that's not true, because this isn't looking at a value of monthly rent. It's actually already initialized. So if I were to console.log yearly rents, I'm going to run, it's going to return 6,000. Why? Because we didn't update this value, right? We just put in a raw value here. Yeah, of course. Okay, next question is, can we declare a variable without specifying its type? Let's try it right now. y equals 5. Console.log y. Yeah, we can. So there's the answer. Another question we had earlier was operators. So what is x equivalent to false? I think we had this question. Also, I'm gonna purposely like not put the semicolon there just to show you that it's possible, but everyone should. So if I console log test, oops. Wow. Okay, yeah. So 0 is false. So what I'm saying here is x is 0. So I'm saying 0 equals false. So 0 actually is false in JavaScript as well. So if I said 1, is it true? It is true. What about 10? Oh, false. That's interesting. So actually, only 1 denotes true and 0 denotes false. Everything else is non-ambiguous. Only 0 and 1 are possible Boolean values. Okay, cool. So what did I want to show? Yeah, okay, so let's do our own function real quick. So I hope everyone downloaded Node. Okay, also I wanted to show this real quick. So I made some quick HTML here that has some paragraph that says test. So what's happening here actually? So I have a text file that I literally just put into the browser. And the browser is interpreting my code. So all that's happening here is literally the browser is acting as an interpreter for my code. So my code here is some HTML, and it can be interpreted in the browser. If I were to put this JavaScript file as a script in my HTML, I can look, if I inspect this web page and I look at console, I would be able to see the values that are being printed in the console. This is basically the terminal of your web page. So this is going to be really useful later. Everyone will see. But for now, let's just do things in our own terminal using Node. So let's make a quick function. Let's make the function just, I don't know, someone give me an idea for like a fun function to make real quick. Does anyone have any ideas? Dot product Fibonacci. The dot product would maybe take a little bit longer. Let's do Fibonacci also. You can do recursive functions, sure. But let's just make a simple function. Yeah, returns max. That's a great idea. Let's do max. 3 sums problem. N queens. I don't know. This is some lower division CS. But let's do returns max. I like that one. You guys can all code those functions JavaScript on your own. It's more than possible. Okay, so let's say some function max, and we're gonna have let's say number 1 and number 2. We're gonna make some simple, there's an easier way to do this. I'm sure if you were in 61A, they would make you figure this out in like 1 line. But let's just make it a nice, simple, very easy to read code. So here I'm going to say if number 1 is greater than number 2, we're going to, if number 1 is greater than number 2, let's go return number 1, else return number 2. Are there bit operators in JavaScript? You would have to look that one up. I don't know why you would ever use bit operations in JavaScript like mask or something, but there probably are. Yeah, you would have to look that one up. In any case, indentation can't cause errors in JavaScript like it can in Python, right? Well, let's just try it out. If I had this and this, oops. So let's console.log max 1 and 2. If I say node test.js, just make it whatever your file name is, and make sure the end of the file has JS in it. This lets your interpreter know this is a JavaScript file. So if I run this file, it's going to print 2. So yes, you're right. Indentation does not cause any problems like it would in Python. JavaScript is really nice. It's super easy to use. It's very intuitive. It's really great. I love it. So yeah, max of 1 and 2. If we do max of 2 and 1, it'll return 2 again. But what about 5 and 1? It'll return 5. What about 1 and 1? Does anyone know which one it would return? Trick question. Which one is it returning? The first one or the second one? Number 1 or number 2? 2. Yeah. Good. I like the stuff. But no, yeah. So this is pretty easy, pretty basic. Everyone's familiar with this. Let's just move on to more important stuff real quick. So built-ins. We have some nice built-in functions that are already pre-built into JavaScript, which we can use. For instance, we have a string built-in function, which is 2 lowercase. So if we have some sentence that says this had some weird casing on it, we can say sentence.2 lowercase, and it's just going to put everything on lowercase. We have 2 uppercase. There's probably a million other built-ins. I would suggest trying them out if you're curious, or like just looking them up on Google. In web dev and in any programming, Google is your best friend, but especially in web dev. So you can find probably a million built-in functions in JavaScript. This is just a really useful one that's pretty commonly used. You don't have to go into a demo. This is pretty simple stuff. This is really important though. So we have data types. So for instance, I wanted to find the type of something. So I would say, yes. So to find the type of something, I would say something like this. So I'm going to say const num equals 10. And then I'm going to say const type of num. This is a variable that's going to have some string. Let's see. Yes, it's a variable that I think is going to have some string. And also it's important to note that you can let X, you can define variables like that and then, define it later like that. But obviously it just doesn't look nice. So unless you absolutely need to, I would just say, make your code readable, make it nice and easy to use. So I'm going to say, let type of num equals type of num. So if I console.log type of num, let's test it out here. It's going to say number, which is exactly what we expected. What about 10.1? What's it going to be then? It's also a number because we don't care about floats. Integers, floats, they're all numbers. What about type of number? So what is the type of returning us? And that's a string. So whenever you say type of something, no matter what that is, it's going to return string, number, Boolean. If this was, let's just say false, built-in data structures in JavaScript. Yes, there are, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So if I said this, console.log type of num, it's going to return Boolean because this is a Boolean. Okay, great. We've gone through types. Data structures, we're about to talk about actually specifically the objects that we use in JavaScript. So objects are a collection of data. So they're similar to dictionaries in Python with key value pairs to access data, and they're declared with braces. How is this any different? Yeah, so an object in JavaScript, surprise, surprise, is called JSON, JavaScript object notation. So this is basically the only object in JavaScript other than an array. JavaScript only uses two types of data structures: dictionaries, which are JSONs, and arrays. So JSONs, the only difference, which I'll get into, is that JSONs are not ordered. You can put anything in any different type of order, and arrays are ordered. So this is probably the most important concept to take away from JavaScript today. But a JavaScript object notation is for sharing and sending data. So whenever any data is transferred basically over any website on any web browser, it's transferred through JSON objects. So it's super, super important, and you'll work more with them later. And the notation is really easy, which is nice and convenient. So it's not this, or whatever, I don't know, what's the difference? But in any case, so you have some variable my object. You initialize or instantiate a JSON like this. So you have an open curly brace and you give it some values. So you say name is John. You separate each of the values in the JSON with a comma. You say age is 31 and city is New York. So if I were to say this built-in function stringify, it's just going to basically put everything I wrote in a string. You don't have to do this stringify though. I'll show you an easier way to display what you just wrote down. Let's just get into a demo because it's easier to explain this way. So let's go here and let's say const, let's call this my object. Is our name and age parameters strings or objects? They are strings. That's a great question. So we initialize like this basically. So I'm going to create an object here like this. And let's say I wanted name to be some value, my favorite number to 9, and my last name to be my last name. So if I were to console.log my object, running it here, I see that it prints out really nicely for me. It says name is Emir, favorite number is 9, last name is Katabeg. So there are some built-in objects here. If I do like my object dot, so if I want to access some value in this, let's say I want to find some specific parameter or some specific property of my JSON, I would say my object dot, let's say name. So if I console.log of X, it's just going to return me Emir, which is great. So each of these values is just a variable, and we assign all these variables to so they're variables actually. They're not necessarily strings or objects. They're just regular variables. So this is a string variable. This is no. The question is, do objects have to be declared as a constant? No, they do not. So I can say let my object equals whatever. If I ran this, it would still say the same thing. If I want to just console.log my object, I'm going to run this, and it's going to display my object. especially because if you want to change your JSON later, you don't want it in a const. But let's say I want some data that I'm pulling from, then I'm going to keep it in a const. So you can do it with the let. Can they have methods? That's a great question. No, they cannot. You can try that out, but I'm pretty sure they can. So let's just do function text. No, yeah, I don't think they can. Like, if I put, let's say something here, like test. Oops. Sorry, my typing is like on a different monitor. Test. I don't know. Could this run? This would be interesting. I honestly haven't tried this before ever. Test. Okay, so I guess you actually can put a function in there. I've never seen this before. Yeah, I guess you can do that. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, JavaScript is really nice. Wait, can you console log it? Yeah, I just console logged it here. Console.log my object test. Oh, you mean, what do you mean by console.log it? Can you update the object? Would you do my object name equals new value? Yes, that's a great question. You can do that. So if I say my object dot name equals new name, if I do my object, it's going to say new name. So yes, you can update values like this. Also, a really important thing to note is that I can have multiple JSON objects within JSON objects. So let's say, for instance, I actually wanted a new layer of JSON object. Let's say like I wanted some like persons. So let's say I want all of this inside of like a person1 object. And then I want, you know, some like person2 to have like some new values here. So let's delete this. So if I wanted some new values here, if I console.log this, my object, it's important to note this is each individual like layer here is its own person because I initialized it like this. Or sorry, it's its own JSON object. So person1 is a JSON object and person2 is a JSON object. If I do my object dot person1, it's going to console.log just person1. If I do type of, if you ever want to check the type of something, just do type of. So if I do this, it's an object, which is great. So why do you need the parentheses after test when you put in my object? Why do you need the parentheses after test when you put in my object? Oh, you can test it out without the parentheses. I just figured that it would automatically return something. You could probably point to that function and then in the console.log add the parentheses, but I just did it as simplicity. We have one last thing to go over real quick, so I'm just going to go over it. Why can't you update the object if it's declared as const? You can try it. So if I want to say my object, I'm going to do like, this is literally going to be like 2 more minutes. So my object dot name, sorry, dot person1 dot name is now equal to John. Would this work? My object. Okay, I guess it does work. So actually you can use a constant or a let and still change the individual values here. I think the only thing you can't do is now reassign this JSON object to a different JSON object. But you can manipulate the values inside the JSON object. I just don't think you can update the entire thing when it's a constant. But you can update the values inside. Okay, I'm going to go over this real quick. Most of you would probably already know this, but arrays are just the exact same way as they are in any other In any other like programming language, you can define them with the brackets. You'll have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, whatever. You can access them with this bracket notation. So if I say days of the week 0, it'll go to the 0 and it's indexed by 0, obviously. We have a spread operator. So if I have fruits equals to apples, orange, and banana, I'm going to say let another fruit. I'm going to do this notation, which is ... fruits. Basically, what this is saying is copy everything at the beginning and then add papaya at the end. So if I console.log fruits, it's going to show me this. And if I console.log another fruits, it's going to add papaya to the end. I can do the exact same thing with papaya at the beginning, then comma ... fruits. The ... fruits is basically just copying all the values of this array into any point of this array that I want. I can even put it in the middle. I can put whatever. This notation here is just to copy one array, their values into your array without adding a new array. If I wanted a new array, I would just put an array around it, but we don't. We just want it to look nice and clean like this. So that's the end of lecture today. Please stick around if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer. Also, all the announcements I said at the beginning will still stand. This recording will be posted and we'll have ed posts and all that good stuff. So thank you all for coming. How do we use JSON again? Yeah. Naruto mid, man, I don't know about that. I don't know if I can agree.
Amir, I just have a quick question.
Yeah, of course.
When I tried to return the command on my terminal, but every time it doesn't give me any line, like it doesn't just give me another my directory, doesn't return anything.
The difference, yeah, let me answer your question real quick, Mythic, but Tazi, the difference between JavaScript object and JSON, you don't have to worry about that. The
No, I
JavaScript,
mean, even the simplest command, like for example, like let's y equals 10,
yeah,
and I do not like console log return and yeah, y, and when I do like test JS, like it doesn't return anything. I don't know why. I don't see the 10.
so that's probably because you're running, that's probably because, oh wait, sorry, wait, Eric, give me one quick second for Pratyush. We use JSON for any like object where we're trying to store values. So any object that we're trying to store values, we're going to like initialize like an object. It's basically just a way for us to keep track of like, you know, some like, you know, it's just an object. It can keep track of some values. We can manipulate values. It's easier than just defining like individual variables, you know.
What is the difference between JSON syntax and JavaScript object syntax?
So JSON syntax versus JavaScript. So JavaScript, don't worry about JavaScript objects. JavaScript object notation, JSONs are basically the object that's used in JavaScript. JavaScript objects, like there's a nuance there, but no one really uses them. JSONs are what everyone uses. And basically it's just, there's no significant difference. Like you can look it up, but no one really uses object notation. We always use JSONs whenever we work on, you know, web apps.
Okay, so there's no difference between them syntactically.
Yeah, I don't really think so. I've never honestly even used a JSON object. Or a JavaScript object. I don't know what it is. So JSONs are
And-
what everyone uses. And whenever you like, look, if you want to like inspect any page and look at the elements of the page, you're gonna find like JSON objects embedded in this page. You're never
Yeah,
gonna.
so how is a JSON used? I know there's like a importance, it was covered earlier in like web applications.
Yeah, so anytime we want to send information through the web app, it's through a JSON. So that's going to make more sense to you later. But all you need to know is the only object is other than an array is a JSON. So anytime we want to encode values in an object, we use a JSON. And if we want to like send these values, it's like if we want to send values via the internet, they're always bundled in a JSON. So that's
Could you
yeah.
repeat that one line again about how JSON is used for communication?
Yeah, so anytime we want to send information via the web, we always use a JSON object.
I see. So between the web client and web server.
Yes, actually, exactly. But
Nice.
you're gonna learn exactly what that means later. But yes, anytime you're prompting a response from the server, it's gonna send you back a JSON object.
I see. And then clients give and then if servers need something from the client, it goes the other way around.
Exactly. And we send a JSON object to the server.
I see. And then one last question.
Yeah.
What's the significance of const, let, and var again?
Yeah, so just don't use var. Just use let and const. So var and let are essentially the same thing. Actually, var came first in JavaScript. Then we stopped using it because of let. Let, I don't think, yeah. So this is the thing. This I think is the difference of why we use let is because of this. So yep, this is the exact reason. So var, you can overwrite it. So like, see here, I have var x equals 10 and then var x equals 12. I'm reinitializing it, but there's no error being thrown.
Yeah.
With let, I'm saying y equals 10, and then I'm reinitializing it to y equals 5. This will actually throw an error because I'm like, there's already a variable that exists. I cannot reinitialize a variable with let. So this is the major difference. This is why we use let. This is the only difference between them, but we don't want to like accidentally use the same variable and overwrite it in our code,
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was thinking that if you remove the let from line 7, so yeah, just y equals 12. It seems kind of dumb to create like a definition of let, but I'm guessing let helps, like coders remember previous variables.
Yeah, exactly.
I see. And then what about const? It seems like we can reinitialize or reassign const.
You actually can't. So if I ran this, it would throw me an error and it would say because z equals 12. So I'm trying to reinitialize it. It won't show me like a error in compile time, but in runtime, it'll say, hey, you're reinitializing a constant. You cannot do this.
Okay, so in conclusion, variables allow you to declare the variable name a second or another time. Let variables do not let you reinitialize a variable with the same name, but it does let you reassign. While for constants, you can't reinitialize a variable with the same name, nor can you reassign it.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. This lecture was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. No problem. Cool. Okay. Any other questions? I'm sorry. I don't know who.
I'm still here. I'm still waiting.
Okay, Eric. Yeah. Sorry. You mind repeating your question one more time?
Yeah. When I do, for example, let y 10 console log, it doesn't return.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's probably, did you download Node?
Yeah.
Okay. So did you go to, you have a terminal open, yeah? Like this?
Yes.
Okay,
Just
great.
like you.
Where do you have your file saved? Your test.js?
It's on a test folder on my desktop.
Okay, so in your terminal, did you CD into your desktop?
Yes, and
And
then
then,
the test folder.
so if you're in your terminal, if you say, oops, if you say ls,
Yes,
you see your file.
yes, test.js.
Okay, great. So you're saying that this is your code?
Yes. I can show you my screen if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Can't.
Yeah,
This is
let me give you permission.
okay.
Oops, wait, sorry, let me stop the recording.
Okay. Can you see it?
Yep, give me 1 sec. Recording stopped.